fast, but it's a lot better than what we had before. Apparently, it's possible to stack it, but let's explain. By putting 2 books enchanted with a curse in the grindstone, click out the end result, and it'll put them all back in your inventory. Since the 1.16 update, the Nether has been a lot. Then, after the dimension loads in, you'll find yourself on the other side virtually unchanged. However, the game keeps your shield held up even while you're attacking or sprinting, meaning you can fight mobs as usual while still blocking their attacks. Now, the glitch doesn't allow you to eat or place blocks while you're doing this, but the other payoff is pretty worthwhile. Minecraft has a surprising amount of flying mobs, but while we're all familiar with blazes, phantoms, and bats on that list, there are 2 unlikely candidates that also fit. Even though Strider doesn't seem much variation by itself, these things can actually be persuaded to the skies. Through the help of a fishing rod and a scroll wheel, all it takes to do this glitch is switching on and off of the item rapidly in your hotbar. And bam, just like that, you can fly, or at the very least fall with style on the back of your Strider. And hey, the same even goes for pigs and carrots in the overworld, though they'll have a rougher landing than the Strider does. The textures in the game are fairly simplistic, to say the least, which sometimes means it's hard to make out what's what, like the hearts you see while riding a horse. For the longest time, I never understood the texture, but thanks to user LittleDominator64 on Reddit, a closer look actually shows their saddles, which I'll admit zoomed out is still pretty hard to see, but once you put them side by side, the picture clears up, especially if you recognize the pixels of the metal bit of the spur. Now, I won't claim it's a great texture, but hey, now I know what it's supposed to be, and maybe you do too. The first ever mob vote for Minecraft wasn't between any of these mobs, but rather it was between the llama and the alpaca. Back in 2016, Jeb posted this unofficial Twitter poll to help fans decide whether or not it should be llamas or alpacas. And as we know, llamas won in a landslide, and I'm afraid whoever won in alpacas got a real spit in the face when they were added in. Ice boats are great, but they don't handle corners too well, especially when you're traveling at high speeds. But luckily, that's where this user's water design starts to help you out. And with this, we'll be able to travel diagonal distances without being perfectly aligned down the center, which is a huge help when you're traveling in the overworld so that you don't fall off course. So while another design might be technically faster, this one feels a lot more user-friendly. Unicorns don't exist in Minecraft, and call me crazy, but I don't think we'll get them anytime soon. But you know what's the next best thing? Getting to be a unicorn in Minecraft. Kind of. You see, by using the replace item command, it's entirely possible to put an end rod on the player's head and then become your own kind of narwhal. Is it practical? Of course not, but it definitely looks ridiculous. And honestly, the replace item command is just full of so many silly quirks anyway that if you have an afternoon, you might want to get familiar with it. Just mess around and see what you can find. It's well worth a shot. I don't think I'm breaking any new ground by calling axolotls adorable, because just look at them. But with all that cuteness, they're not very fast, though that can all change with the help of a lead. Strangely enough, if you tie up an axolotl like so, it'll start to move around at some breakneck speeds, and this works both on land or in the ocean domain. So if you're looking to get your pet some exercise outside of the bucket, it seems like a decent workout, though just keep in mind, it's tough to take it off the leash once it's on. Now, the laws of gravity don't exactly apply in Minecraft. I mean, clearly. But what's stranger than that is when Minecraft isn't even consistent on its own terms. For instance, gravel falls when there's nothing beneath it, and similarly, a lantern can only be placed with something solid above or below it. So, then why does this work? Sure, the gravel is supported by the lantern, but the lantern's supported by the gravel just the same, and if you break either one, the whole thing falls apart, giving us all perhaps the most literal definition of a symbiotic relationship. You see, in Java, we see a gold nugget as just that, something that you can use to craft a gold ingot, but that's about it. But in Bedrock, it's fuel. For some reason. When I first heard of this, I thought, there's just no way. But yeah, if you try it, it does in fact burn. But it's not even a good fuel source. You need about 12 of them just to smelt up one item. But if you're looking to burn some cash, I guess this does the trick. Say you're trying to light up around your base, and you want something more than just a couple of torches. So, to solve that, you crafted a whole bunch of redstone lamps. But now your problem is, how do you power them? Sure, you can use a lever, but that's awkward anywhere you put it. And daylight sensors are only going to be on for part of the time. So, what do? Well, apparently, by putting an item frame on a wooden pressure plate, that gives off enough weight to actually power on the thing. And now you got a constant redstone signal, giving you a sleek and stylish way to keep your lights on. And thankfully, without all the bulky redstone. With the way that mobs spawn, certain creatures aren't going to mix much in your world, which is fine, but it seems that some of these coded interactions just go unseen by the public. And this is no different. See, I wouldn't blame you if you've never noticed that polar bears can attack foxes, because you're probably not bringing many foxes over there anyway. anyway. But sure enough, add one to the vicinity, and the polar bear will start to attack. And speaking as someone who's lost mobs to foxes in the past, I'm completely on board with that. If you've watched any TV show or movie with a police scene, you're probably familiar with the idea of one-way glass. And to my surprise, we can make that in Minecraft as well. If we were to make a room of glass and then fill every single wall with invisible item frames and map art, then any perpetrator standing inside can only see the map art. However, when we stand outside, we can see in just fine. And let me reiterate, this has to be done with invisible item frames. Otherwise, we just see that leather texture out the back. Since Minecraft has so many items, you could see a texture 100 times without taking the time to study the details. And I think the iron door fits that category. Now, from this zoomed out view, it looks the same as any door that we put in our hotbar. But take a closer look at the item itself, and you'll notice that the door doesn't have a handle in its sprite, which honestly seems like a clever detail. After all, we can't open the door without a redstone signal, so it makes sense there's no player accessible handle on the thing. And it's amazing to me how just 2 little extra pixels can really show how much care went into the design. If we place a set of white glazed terracotta like so, the patterns merge to create something of a penguin head along the bottom. And whether you think this looks more like Club Penguin or Tux from Linux, I think it's a funny detail nonetheless. But it'll definitely be hard to unsee, so might as well add some half slabs and make it a penguin peekaboo in your next build. If you drop the warden from build height to bedrock, it would still live. But if you have a 319 block drop into dripstone spikes, then that's enough to kill the warden in a single drop. So clearly the warden is a tough mob to kill, but just how tough is it? Well, looking at a comparison like this, you can clearly see that the warden's health is substantially larger than just about any other mob in the game. It's even more than the Ender Dragon. Though if the warden's supposed to be this new unkillable mob, then why does the Wither in Bedrock Edition still have more health? Up to 50 hearts more in hard mode. Brutal. Though, as difficult as that sounds, there is an easy way to kill the warden without using any armor or enchantments. With just a strength 2 potion, you can get rid of the warden before it even finishes its sonic boom cycle. Just build up 3 blocks tall, land some critical hits, and make sure you have enough hunger filled up to regen. Because in just one hit, a warden can deal 45 damage, which, to put that into perspective, would mean that it wipes out more than double your life bar in a single blow. And to even withstand one hit from this thing, you'd need full protection 2 diamond armor. And even then, that'll still only let you survive on half a heart. But while its melee attack is fierce, its sonic boom attack is severely underpowered. Now, it used to deal 15 hearts of damage, but now it only does 5, which still sounds like a lot until you notice that a witch can survive getting attacked by 2 wardens without even breaking a sweat. No joke, with how the witch regens with their healing potions, it'll never die to either of these wardens. Though, there is still one way the sonic boom can deal some serious damage, and we'll see that later in the video. In a lot of ways, single player can be a much riskier operation than a server. At the very least, you've got no one else to blame if something goes wrong. So, say you're playing by yourself late one night and happen to stumble into a nether river. Now, the situation does look pretty dire, but not unsalvageable. You see, one major exploit in the single player system is the ability to pause whenever you like. And that's where the saving grace comes in. By quitting and rejoining constantly, you can use the brief seconds of spawn protection each time to maneuver yourself out of the situation. Is it cheating? Sure, but hey, who said exploits have to be fair? Hidden doors are a very slick system to show off in your base, but the standard levers and buttons make for a pretty bland input to use. So that's where we need to get creative and resort to this classic bit of knowledge. Arrows and Endermen don't mix, meaning you can't even land a shot on it if the mob was stuck in place. So if we were to tuck the Enderman in a minecart like such, you notice how any arrow shot at him will physically bounce off, and even go through walls. And if we happen to tuck a target block behind that very wall, then this becomes our brand new button, and quite the spectacle too. To be honest, few things are more satisfying than landing a shot with a gas fireball, and intercepting the shot with an arrow of your own is cooler as well. But if we were to look at the mechanics at play, there's more going on than just a cool moment. See, the way that it's coded is so that the fireball when shot with an arrow will move the direction of the player's head. So shoot a fireball and then look up, that fireball's going to the sky. Or if you're looking for a real challenge, you can aim your head below and you'll shoot a fireball right towards that subscribe button for new notifications on future videos. And thank you, by the way. And while this is likely to save time with the coding process, it's barely noticeable most of the time. Because after all, if you can land that shot, you're trying to kill the ghast anyway. Oftentimes, an animator's work goes underappreciated, since if they did their job right, you shouldn't be able to notice it much. It should just fit right in. But today, I'd like to give a little spotlight to an animation you might not have noticed. And luckily, our subjects for that are these adorable sleeping foxes. See, if we move in for a closer look, you'll notice that these snooze and somethings actually have a subtle breathing animation. Is it a big detail? Not at all. But I do think it's nice to recognize the little tidbits that the developers added in. And as far as that goes, this is right up there in my mind with the sea lantern's glowing animation. If you've watched a couple of speedruns, you probably heard the term damage boosting. That is, using the force of knockback to push us into prime locations. And in Minecraft, that works just the same. Since taking damage pushes our player slightly, we can time that with a jump to make something of a super leap. And that's best displayed with a fall damage. As this user shows, we can use the power of pain from this situation to launch ourselves up a couple of blocks. And essentially, this makes any block in the game bouncy, to some degree. Though I wouldn't recommend trying this more than once at a time. It might be too much for your life bar. This command summons a wolf, and this one summons my pet dog Graham every single time. And the only difference is that the way that I got this one was using the F3+I command, since that will allow us to copy everything about an entity, down to its exact NBT data. And folks, this will work for any mob or block that you have, meaning they could even copy everything inside a chest, including the item-specific attributes, which is a real lifesaver when you're trying to mess around in creative. And it'll save you from having to look at the wiki to figure out what exact tag you need to change for a blue axolotl. This door is locked, but that's nothing that a bit of water can't solve, since with a splash bottle of water right here, we're able to extinguish the campfire through a wall, and that'll trigger an observer to open up the door. And then if you want the system to be reusable, we just walk through, have a dispenser reignite it with a flint and steel, and that'll make sure it's ready for the next time that we walk outside. Minecraft's Warden used to look like this. Back in 2020, the Warden was developed under the nickname the Stalker, and it had two designs, one that was tall and lanky, and the other one that crawled around when it chased you. But Mojang thought it wasn't scary enough, so they scrapped it in favor of this new design, which they called the Hollowed, which did make it into the game's code, but was also scrapped. This time because it was deemed too gory for Minecraft. When lava and water mix, you get stone, so why doesn't that happen here? Well, as a bizarre addition to vanilla, the community has found that by placing blocks around the water and then a warp sign waterlogged inside, we can effectively place lava above it. And the reason this works is because even though water can occupy the same space as a sign, lava can't, which makes it think that it's on top of a full block instead of a water source. Mojang has never cared much for the laws of physics, and there have been plenty of posts made complaining about these nonsensical bits in Minecraft. I mean, we're even guilty of that ourselves. But who among us would complain about being able to become an actual waterbender? See, by using sticky pistons and honey blocks, we can make the water fall however we want it to. And then once you remove it, it'll actually stay that way. Simply build your structure, pour some water over top, and then break all of the blocks that you used when you're done. I mean, if you wanted to, you could use lava as well to make your own kind of modern art piece, though to me it looks more like a fire hazard. And really, however you choose to use this trick, it's sure to impress even the most seasoned of players. Trapdoors seem to make for pretty lousy traps. I mean, if you stand on top of it, most of us know what it is, so we're not going to be surprised when it flips open. But what these lack as a trap for humans, they apparently make it up as a trap for mobs. You see, if you or I were stuck in this, we just hop out. But to the animals in the game, they can't just jump on these trapdoors, so that leaves them stuck inside. But what's weirder is that from the outside coming in, they can even clear the jump. So why the difference? Who knows? But if you want a fence alternative, this might just fit the bill for your future pens. You ever wonder what it's like to be a mob? I mean, there are so many different shape-shifting and morph mods out there that I'm sure you've thought of it once or twice. And while those third-party options will give you one interpretation, there's actually a way to do this in-game. While in spectator mode, if you interact with a mob, you can actually see from their point of view, and some of which even offer up different filters and effects. So whether you want a creeper's green vision, a spider's reflective eyes, or maybe even just to be safe in a shulker shell, then by all means, go ahead and try this feature. Water isn't all that bouncy. A bold statement, I know. But that might be unfortunate, because as you'll soon find out, these fish love to bounce around. And to test that, let's set up a slime block trampoline right over here on dry land. Then all it takes is spawning a cod in place, and you'll see that sucker take off to the moon and back. It looks like it's having a blast, but if you're gonna do this, maybe give the fish a health boost or something, so that this party doesn't turn into a murder mystery. So even though these fish might not like dry air, I think this might make their stay a bit more enjoyable. If you've ever pieced together a chicken farm, then you know that these mobs can lay a ton of eggs, and normally we're left cleaning up that overflow. And while that's true, it's apparently not a universal fact, since this chicken right here is incapable of laying any eggs across its lifetime. And what makes this one so special? Well, the reason is that chickens spawned from a baby zombie jockey are coded to not lay eggs ever, and this is likely to prevent any kind of zombie from picking up that egg item and never despawning. This isn't an end portal, but actually it's just a clever design using skulk blocks, and since these new blocks have a texture that looks like outer space, we can use them to create some new illusions in the other dimensions. And for another illusion, simply take some of the new skulk vein, overlay it on a diamond block, and bam, you've got yourself a blue version of the magma block. Truth be told, villagers do not seem like the smartest mobs, and more often than not I'm racking my brain trying to figure out their logic. But occasionally, they have their moments. For a case study, take a look at this unemployed villager. Not too impressive, right? But add any workstation within a distance of 32 blocks, and they'll start some serious pathfinding. No joke, these NPCs can even work through mazes to try and find a job, which I'll admit is serious dedication. But why that same villager refuses to restock when the block is right next door, that I'll never understand. Minecraft is known to reuse a few textures, and while they can sometimes be groan-worthy, or even confusing, other times it goes unnoticed. Like, take the smooth and regular stone blocks for example. Looking at them like this, the difference seems pretty big, and honestly their biggest similarity seems to be in the name, not the texture. But add a pressure plate to the top, and now it's easier to see. As is, it's tough to recognize which block is which when the borders share the same texture. So while it's a very minor detail, I do have to commend Mojang here. They reused the texture, and I was none the wiser until it was pointed out. When Crying Obsidian got added into the 1.16 snapshots, it was exciting for a few different reasons. Obviously, respawn anchors are cool in their own right, but the block actually has a past prior to that. So while you might not have played Minecraft back in 2011, there is still a way to relive that history. When you go into the Resource Pack tab, you'll see something called Program Art, and after you turn that on, you'll notice that the Crying Obsidian texture now reflects the old block's glory days. And with that, finally, Jeb's promise of it getting added in was fulfilled. Every time that you break a Skull Catalyst block, it drops 20 XP, which means that if we carry these around, we'll have a quick and portable way to repair your mending tools whenever you step away from the base of your farms. And since it's not exactly easy to get a bunch of bottles of enchanting, I think you'll find this is a lot more reusable. According to Mojang, honey is the stickier block when compared to slime blocks. But why do these only stick to slime blocks then and not the honey block? Well, even though it's on the bug tracker, the reason is because honey is 14 by 15 by 14, while slime is a full 16 pixels on each side. And that would be why we can't put our vines, glow lichen, and the rest on top of these, just because there's not enough room. Here's how to trade your dirt for emeralds. It's just gonna take a few steps. First, we have to play on 1.19 so that we can turn our dirt into mud using the water bottle, and then dry out that mud block on top of dripstone for the clay blocks. After that, we break the clay blocks for the clay balls, and then we trade those with a stonemason, finally getting us our emeralds. So it is quite the process, but being able to literally go from dirt to dollars is worth it in my eyes. Without breaking any blocks, how would you get out of this hole? Well, silly as it seems, a door is actually the solution, and maybe the best one. Since if you place down a door and then flip it back and forth, you'll be able to hop up the steps of the door and go up 2 blocks at a time, which can be exceptionally useful for helping you get out of a hole or an animal pen. And that way, any of the other mobs that are trapped in there with you, they won't be able to hop up the blocks while you're pillaring out to escape. If you've ever gotten rid of a wandering trader, then you know that llamas could be an aggressive bunch. Sure, it's to be expected, they're a neutral mob, but something about getting spat on just adds insult to injury. So if you too are tired of getting saliva sprayed by these bullies, there's actually a way to turn the tables. You see, a shield is decent for blocking, but we can actually go one step further and even deflect the spit. No joke, with a weapon and the proper timing, it's actually possible to hit the spit back at your foe. And now I just wish that it would give you the Return to Sender achievement as well. That'd be amazing. Now, on this show, we've talked plenty about the different quirks and idiosyncrasies that you can find in Bedrock, and with the 1.17 update came a slew of new ones. To see such, take a look at this axolotl here. Now, if we were to tie up the animal with a lead and then pick it up with a water bucket, then, when we place it back down, it'll still have that leash attached. And the reason being is that in Bedrock, all of the NBT data is saved when you put the mob inside the container. So if you need another inventory slot, this is one way to bury the lead. Fall damage is something of a great equalizer in the Minecraft world, because no matter the enchantments, the potions, or even the hearts that you got, there's an upper limit for all of that. But have you ever wondered how high that could be? Well, as it turns out, if you were to mix together a full set of Protection 4 and Feather Falling 4 netherite armor, a Turtle Master potion with Resistance 4, an enchanted golden apple, and then land on a pad of hay bales, that'll let you survive a fall of 4,504 blocks on half a heart. But really, just use a water bucket. When you start 1.19, you'll want to collect a bunch of powdered snow. And why is that? Well, with this powdered snow, we can make a farm like this to filter out our magma cubes down from their biggest size to a smaller stature. And once they're small, we have our frog eat them and get ourselves a handy frog-light farm. Especially if you build this near a magma cube spawner from a bastion. Or you could build it in a mountain and delete the goats instead. As you'll see, back in the beta snapshots for Bedrock, there was a glitch that let frogs eat any goats that got nearby. So even if they can't eat fireflies, at least the goats weren't poisonous. And perhaps unfortunately, this was promptly patched out, since it was just some leftover prototype code. If you don't have an ender chest, then hiding your valuables is a tricky business. And while we've talked plenty about the creative ways to stash your loot, this might just be a new favorite. While playing in Bedrock Edition, if you push a block into a chest minecart, then, even though it's still there, you can't see the entity. And here's the best part, we can open it up just the same. Just make sure your crosshair lines up like such where you can't see the outline of the block, and then you'll be safe to tuck something in the bookcase and know it's safe and sound. And hey, as an added bonus, finally bookshelves have an actual use. Trapdoors and ladders make a great pair. And because of that, you might have noticed this quirk when you put it in your world. You see, by having a trapdoor like such, you can actually climb it to the top just as you would a standard ladder. But that said, it even works if you put the trapdoors and ladders in a pattern like this. And once you see how we can climb one of these, then it's a lot easier to see how this feature works. But trust me, it's only good for a party trick. Trapdoors are much more expensive than ladders, so you're much better placing your planks on the old favorite. Besides, it even looks better too. I swear, even after playing Minecraft for 9 years, I'm still constantly learning new things to do. For example, I've played Bed Wars and Hunger Games hundreds of times with my friends, meaning I've shared countless pieces of armor, weapons, etc., any item you can think of. And somehow, in all of that time, I never realized that you could just hold down the Q key to throw out a steady stream of items. No, I would never do that. I would always just end up throwing it out of the inventory screen or mashing the Q button instead. And really, I don't know if it's all that practical, but now I know it's there, and maybe you do too. Traveling across the different Minecraft biomes is a lot of fun, but while you're doing all that exploring, it's easy to miss the craft details. Can be a tricky process, and sometimes the real secrets don't come from the game itself. For instance, take the Iron Golem. Now, in-game, I always figured this red pixel functioned as the pupil, but no, all it takes is one look at the official 2019 Valentine's Day post from Mojang's Instagram to see that the red part is actually the Golem's sclera. So does that mean that this is canon? Well, I guess I don't know. After all, there was the famous Bluestone incident from the Village and Pillage trailer, so maybe promotional art isn't always to be trusted. But if I had to bet on my assumption versus the artist's rendition, I pick the official every time. Beacons basically define the later stages of the game in Minecraft, but what these are good for in haste, jump boost, and speed, apparently they lack in regeneration. Now, that's not to say that they don't give regen, clearly they do, but a glitch in the code prevents these beacons from giving the full regen after activated. So, to change that, we can fix this glitch with another exploit, and use this system to deactivate and reactivate the beacon for a faster regen, going from a full regen of 72 seconds with the normal one to roughly 51 seconds with our modified. So if you're looking to save some seconds next time you're in danger, then this workaround's what you need. Nobody likes being on the receiving end of knockback, but while it's a pain to be tossed around, this might make it necessary. See, in Bedrock, it's possible to repeatedly punch against your buddy's shield. So if we do that, we can use the knockback that we receive as something of a boost to the new heights. And then we can alternate our positions with them to net some serious verticality. And it might just be the way you and your pal escape out of any future rock in a hard place. And the best part about it is that this is basically just an unintentional feature, so it's not a glitch that's gonna get patched. But whether Mojang takes it out or not, one thing is for certain. It's a trick that's sure to give you and your friends quite the boost. Dragon's Breath is a tough item to get, and that's in no small part thanks to the fact that you need to fight a dragon to get it. But if you want some lingering potions and tipped arrows, then it's a necessity. So if you want to get your supply as quickly as possible, this might speed up the process. See, instead of filling our bottles from the magic on the floor, we can just take as much as we want from the dragon's head. And while it's a glitch, it is nice to have our stuff bottled at the source. Keeping monsters away from your base is a big problem to solve. And while there are simple solutions, like constructing a big wall of blocks, those aren't always the prettiest. So thankfully, these azalea bushes do the trick just the same. No joke, in the current versions, it's possible to place down a ring of these bushes, and that alone will stop the monsters from getting any closer. Which is ridiculous for sure, but it's hard to criticize something that works this easily. And hey, it'll give you an early start in building a hedge maze, for what that's worth. Render distance can make a world of difference, and it's one of the more clear benefits to playing Minecraft on a beefy computer. But it turns out, on Bedrock, that draw distance is even more impressive. See, you might not have noticed, but with the way that the game loads, we're able to stand at the main end island and see the outer islands within view, which I'll admit is a surreal sight. And it's made even more enjoyable by the fact that Bedrock handles render distance loading substantially better than Java. And I imagine this will make pulling off your next flying machine journey a lot easier to do, just as long as you don't fall off. If you know how to use it, then Redstone can open up a new world to Minecraft. Truly, in the right hands, it's an amazing resource. But as useful as it is, sometimes Redstone can be a bit unsightly. But don't worry, with an item frame and a map, it's possible to make that redstone basically invisible. As you'll notice, item frames are entities like you and me, meaning we can overlap their hitboxes with the redstone like so. And then once we add in some map art to match the floor, we've got some unnoticeable redstone. And honestly, I hope this will let some builders finally mess around with the redstone side in their builds, because that's a holy matrimony I'd be happy to see. The days in Minecraft are pretty short, and at only 20 minutes per cycle, you're sure to see these sun and moon textures fairly often. But if you ever wondered how that rotation works, after all, Minecraft's a game of blocks, so an orbit like this seems pretty nonsensical. But it turns out, we can actually find the science on display. See, if you head underneath Minecraft's world, you can see the sun and the moon are constant objects, even rotating under us in the void. And that gets readily apparent when you play on something like Skyblock where there's no bedrock layer to hide it. But more importantly than that, it gives us this cool shot of a sun on the black sky, and for me that's worth it. Jump boost is great, but it's not always a joy to brew up the potion, especially if you don't have plenty of rabbit's feet on hand. And while there is some way to get more height to your jump by doing damage boosting and the like, maybe let's try this instead. Trust me, it'll be a lot better for your health bar. You see, bubble elevators aren't just useful for getting up to your penthouse apartment. But if you build a formation like this, it actually lets you get off a 2-block tall jump. Sure, it can be tough to time, but when the alternative is lighting yourself on fire, I think the choice is clear. Under the surface, Minecraft has plenty of hidden features that I don't think anyone would find naturally. Like, case in point, let's say you're raiding a woodland mansion, and for some reason, you brought along your trusty blue sheep. But to your surprise, just as you start to fight the evoker, he turns on the very thing you love and makes your blue sheep into a red sheep. Now, that's weird in its own right, but I think it's even funnier that the game rule mob griefing actually can prevent this from happening. Because really, when it comes to mobs damaging your stuff, this is what we're all worried about. Nothing else comes close. Here's how to beat the warden using just some wool blocks. Now, as you might know, wool can be used to deafen the sound that comes from the vibrations, which if we take that to the logical extreme, if we then place wool around a warden as it's climbing out of the ground while spawning, we'll be able to make it both trapped and oblivious to what's happening around it, which at that point means we can walk around the perimeter and then it'll despawn after time when it doesn't get any stimulus. It's a bold move, but it can work out if you've got the right skills. It's hard to notice, but the game actually has a green vignette that can show during the nausea effect. But you're only able to see this if you change this setting in accessibility, because when the distortion effects are lowered, the game switches out the typical warbly effect for a kind of green tint that creeps in on your screen, which is a lot less, well, nauseating, and honestly at this point it feels like the effect's not even that annoying. A mild inconvenience at worst. If you've messed around with the summon command, you know Minecraft has some weird entities in the code, and since they're not traditional, it means we get some odd behaviors when you mix them, like you'll see here. Now, when you light a block of TNT on fire, it turns into a prime TNT as you would expect. But what might surprise you is that if we then shoot this new entity with arrows, our projectiles just bounce off, which means that the only way that we're mixing TNT with arrows is through command blocks. Even though Minecraft's textures are simple, a surprising amount of care can go into them, and if you take the time to really study a certain block, you might notice something new. For instance, some of you might be surprised to see that the prismarine texture is actually animated. What's happening here is that the block is slowly transitioning from a bluish hue to a green one, and honestly, without the help of a time-lapse or a chart, I would have no way to be able to notice. But I guess this settles any debates going forward. Is it blue? Is it green? Well, it's both. Recently, it came to my attention that killing a wither skeleton with a charged creeper actually gives a 100% chance of it dropping a skull, which is cool, but clearly importing creepers to the nether is not that practical. Though, for those on Bedrock Edition, there might be a more viable option. You see, in that version, if a charged creeper kills a stray, then it also drops a guaranteed wither skull. And since lightning and creepers only occur in the overworld, this seems a lot more forgiving. And if you do have Bedrock, then by all means, why not give this a shot and make those Java friends jealous? You might not see it, but there's actually a fish living inside of this block. Sure enough, you can waterlog mangrove roots, and the water doesn't flow out, meaning a fish can live safely inside. All you have to do is place a tower of 2 root blocks, fill the top one with regular water, and then the bottom one with a bucket of fish. After that, break the bottom block, and you've got yourself the weirdest fish tank. But that's not the only mob stuck where it's not supposed to be, since if you actually look at these walls we placed nearby, you notice that there's a frog placed inside of the gap. As Razeworks pointed out, the frog's hitbox is so small that it can squeeze right in between 4 walls placed in a square like so. And if that seems like a tight fit, you wouldn't be wrong, but now it's time for me to tell you how we squeezed 6,402 mobs into just this one bow. If we were to fill up the inventories on a chest boat, a llama, and ourselves with shulker boxes, and in each of those shulker boxes we filled them up with a beehive full of 3 bees each, that would add up to 6,400 mobs. And then we add on 2 parrots to our shoulders for the remaining 2. And since we can put chest boats as a passenger inside of a minecart, that means that us and our new friends can tackle both the high seas and high speeds of a roller coaster. But that's only scratching the surface for how useful these chest boats can be. Now, in 1.19, don't build your super smelter like this, but instead, do it like this. Since one chest boat positioned like so can fill 9 hoppers simultaneously, we can make an extremely efficient furnace array pretty cheap. And for an ad, use blast furnaces instead of the regular furnace, and the end result will be 18 times faster than what we're used to. Look, it'll bounce a bit before breaking into blocks and sticks, just like the old boats used to. You don't have to play Minecraft for long to know that Endermen do not like to be looked at. But while a passing glance is enough to get them mad, apparently they're pretty honorable in a staring contest. Sure enough, the next time you look an Enderman in the eyes, all you gotta do is maintain eye contact. Doing that is enough to lock them in place. Seriously, they won't even attack. They'll just stare at you for as long as you stare at them. Now sure, after you look away, they will still attack, but maybe you can take that extra time and even just regen before the fight. After all, if you know that a brawl is coming, why not prepare for it? Sometimes you gotta pick the lesser of two evils. So while sweet berries might be a pain while you're walking around, turns out they're invaluable when it comes to falling. You see, the way that Minecraft calculates fall damage, there are certain things that can reset your fall distance in midair. And as it happens to be, berry bush damage is one of them. Getting pricked by one of these, even if you fall from sky limit, is enough to take away all the fall damage and keep you safe. And if you really don't want to take any chances, this even works with baby bushes, which won't even prick you on your way down, which I'd definitely call a sweet deal. Snow golems make for great friends, but they are the best protectors. And really, unless they're attacking blazes, these snowballs are not good for much. Though if we take some blocks from the nether, we can effectively turn that around. See, in Bedrock Edition, these snowball entities work fairly different, letting them even catch on fire when thrown like so. And that can let us turn our snow golem pals into vicious flamethrowers. If you ask me, that's a welcome improvement. So if you make sure no mobs can jump in and kill them, this might be the best way to defend your base. Bedrock, as we're all familiar with it, is a pretty strong block. But obviously, we've also seen our fair share of glitches and bugs to break the unbreakable. And while that's true, this might be both the strangest and the simplest method in my book. See, in Bedrock Edition, if you lay a cauldron underneath a piece of bedrock, or any block for that matter, and then fill it in twice with powdered snow buckets, the result is a powdered snow block in place of that bedrock. And what's even better is that we can reuse that same snow for doing it all over again. Leads definitely serve their purpose, but while they're good for guiding mobs, they aren't as much for decoration, though a bucket is all we need to flip that switch. See, if you were to place an axolotl next to a fence post, tie the two together with a lead, and then pick up the axolotl again in the water bucket, the lead will still be knotted to the pole, which is bizarre, but it'll let us get that extra detail from Minecraft building. And if you ask me, that's a lot easier than having an invisible rabbit nearby. Hiding an entrance in your base is no easy task, because how do you balance something that's practical to use, but also keeps out the intruders? Well, if you take after this Reddit user, we might just have our answer. See, while tridents are great for launches around the skies, they can also let us enter the crawling animation without a trapdoor. And with that, we can essentially create a one-by-one entrance to a hidden room. Then, after covering the wall with some kind of custom map art, we can slide past the item frame and into your lair with ease. On the whole, I love the different stone types that Minecraft has added in, but somehow I never seem to have enough when I go to use one. So if you too find yourself running dry on granite, diorite, or andesite, don't sweat. Because apparently, if you have enough quartz, you can actually craft each of them. And while some of this I get, the granite recipe just makes no sense to me. You need a quartz and a diorite to do it. So someone tell me how 2 white items are able to make this color, because I've got no clue. But I guess I don't have to understand the logic to use it, and I'll definitely be crafting this in the future. Scale in Minecraft is a funny thing, and while some of it makes no sense, like why are the husks taller than the zombies, other examples are pretty satisfying. Say we grab ourselves a dropper. Now, by itself, there's nothing too satisfying about it, but throw a button on the face, and you'll notice that it's the exact right size for the dropper's mouth. And in my book, it makes the dropper look more like a wine bottle than a piece of redstone. Though, I'll add that this only works with certain orientations. Because thinking about it, it's probably for the best that we don't gag them anyway, but if you want a neat detail for your building, this might fit that bill. Instead of placing all these flowers by hand, we're gonna do it with a bow. Strange as it may seem, using the place feature command, we're able to swap out an entity for a decoration. So if we set up the execute command like this in a command block, that'll be able to turn our spray of arrows into a beautiful flower garden. And if you want to make this whole process even faster, I'd recommend using a multi-shot crossbow so you get even more of a spray at the end. Just make sure not to shoot anybody while they're enjoying the roses. How did we make these minecarts fly? Well, the reason's bees. Because if you summon in a minecart riding as a passenger on top of a bee, it'll actually still let the minecarts fly around, and they'll still be functional. And then if we take after this user and make the bees invisible, we have quite the minigame to climb up to the top of the base. Just make sure you don't hit the sneak key, otherwise you'll be in a spot way worse than last place. Fall damage is one of the most common ways to die in Minecraft, so we're often looking for ways to avoid it. But while that's usually done through the help of water buckets, it turns out that powdered snow might be the best option. And a big reason for that is this glitch where we can land on a carpet on top of powdered snow blocks and not take any fall damage, even though it's covered, letting us not only create virtually invisible landing pads, but also build them in the nether. And that's a lot more robust than the water that we're used to. It's an old fact of life. Walls make for a great defense, but when you're in a pinch, it's not always easy to build your own barriers, or get through them. So what if instead we could walk through an existing one? Well, it turns out that's not as crazy as it sounds, because as you'll notice, these these ender pearls are not just good for teleporting away, but also inside. And if you aim them like such, we can manage to glitch through solid walls to escape, which I'll admit is risky. After all, the ender pearl is going to deal some damage when you land. But if you have the help to see, in Bedrock, it's entirely possible to tie your boat to the other end of a lead and drag the thing around. Why you would do this, I have no idea, since I'd rather just break the boat and carry it that way. But if you need to, I guess it works. With so many blocks to choose from, Minecraft is bound to have a few repeats. And while it's to be expected, it makes it all the more impressive when Mojang hides those variants. Take the jungle log, for instance. What's happening here is that the jungle log is actually a color shift of the sideways oak texture, even having the same details when you overlap them, which I'll admit is pretty cool. To Quake Pro, and you can get some really wide vision. And then, all it takes is lining yourself up next to a wall, and the job is done. So if you suspect that your friend might be hiding things around your base, this might be the perfect shot to find it. And it'll make Green's job of hiding his even tougher to do. In 1.19, we can turn first we bone meal our stone into moss, then grow two, and now we've got clay, which we can cook into terracotta, and then cook again for our final step, glazed terracotta. Even though you can't see it, it's not a surprise that the ground underneath the snow layer is made up of grass blocks, and you can break it to see as much. But while that grass might look normal when we place a torch, when it's underneath the snow, it's something entirely different. And through the help of an enderman, we can see that texture for ourselves. See, if an enderman were to pick up one of these snowy grass blocks, they'd ditch the snow and just be left with a strange silver turf instead. And while it doesn't offer much functionality outside of being a grass block, it is still a cool souvenir. If you've ever filled out the end portal, you're probably familiar with how this story goes. You place in the eyes of Ender, brace yourself, and then jump in for the fight. Only this time, we're still standing on top, which is pretty weird, but it turns out that on Bedrock, it's possible to stand in the portal without teleporting. All we need to do is place a set of fences underneath like so, and we can essentially make it off limits. Or at least it's off limits until someone breaks that wooden fence, which is a small hurdle to cross. What if I told you we can place lava underwater? Well, that probably sounds ridiculous. But it turns out that there's a way to do this without getting obsidian. See, with the way the cauldrons are coated, we can push one of these into the river, fill it with lava, and then it'll work just the same. So if you've ever wanted to burn alive at the bottom of the ocean, I guess there's a way to do that. But at least we don't light on fire while we're doing it, for whatever that's worth. As we all know, when you see something, the trouble's unseen it. And that exact thing happened to me when I took a closer look at Minecraft signs. Now, when you face them dead on, they seem just fine. Normal, if anything. But once you step to the side, it's easier to notice this hidden detail. And in fact, the text that we typed floats right off the sign, which is a bit peculiar, but I guess it makes some sense. After all, you can't expect the texture to change itself, so the solution is to generate the text on top of it. But even if I know the reason why it's there, it doesn't make recognizing it any less weird. Instead of harvesting your crops like this, try a redstone lamp. Because with the way that the mechanics work for the game, these crops can only exist when there's a certain amount of light source nearby. Which in turn means that if we were to flick the switch off, break one of the crops, the rest will then update so that they're broken too in the new light level. And then you can turn back on the lights and pick up all the new crops that you just harvested, which is probably the simplest amount of redstone that you need to make an automatic crop farm. Ever since the 1.16 update, we've now had support for adding different emojis in the Java edition of Minecraft-related items, like pickaxes, swords, and tridents, and even potions, both splash and regular, which seems like a pretty minor feature to add, but it could make for some extra cool signage, especially if you're trying to sell these different items in a shop. Enchanting your items is a great thing. Whether it's a sword, a elytra, even a hoe, there are plenty of different ways to juice up your favorite items. But what might just be the biggest flex of them all is to take something simple like a flint and steel and spice that up as well. I'm totally serious. In case you didn't know, it's possible to actually enchant this thing, even giving it the mending enchantment. And now, if we're being practical, I have no clue why you do this. But to be at a point in the game where you not only can apply mending and breaking to the thing, but also gather enough XP to charge it, that's next level. Beacons are a great asset in your Minecraft world, and part of that is the abundance of colors to choose from for your beacon beam. But while we're all familiar with doing this using stained glass blocks and glass panes, there's actually one more to that list. See, beacons are transparent blocks, meaning our beam can phase through them just the same. But while you don't see anything different here, look what happens when you use a beacon in conjunction with a glass block. And in fact, the results are the exact same that you would get from using a white stained glass block in its place. And what's the practical use for this? I've got no clue. I mean, obviously it's more cost effective to use white glass, but I guess this is possible. Bedrock Edition is known to have more than a few quirks in its code, and while some of those can be infuriating, others are just hilarious. Like how you can make a fully functioning zip line in your Minecraft world. No joke, if you start swimming in a water column and then step out, you'll still be swimming even in midair. From there, give yourself some chains as a ceiling, and you can sail along this without a care in the world. Granted, you'll need to make sure to have blocks above your head to stay in that state, but that's a simple trade-off for the chance to break the game's physics engine. When you're on multiplayer, it's nice to offer some starting gear to the new player. players. But how do you guarantee that that stuff only goes to those who need it, instead of the rich players who are looking for free handouts? Well, odd as it may seem, this book could do the trick. As RaiseWorks demonstrates, having a book written like so can overload the data and cause a player with too many items in their inventory to get kicked out when they open up the chest. But if you have nothing, it works as planned. And though I barely understand the science behind it, it is a cool system. It only takes one look at the Vanilla Tweaks website to see that Minecraft might have a few texture quirks. And while some of those are mildly infuriating, like the jungle door inconsistency or the smoker's unsymmetrical corners, this one's just plain weird. To see this, place a turtle egg and a diamond into your inventory. Notice any similarities? Here, maybe this helps. As it turns out, the diamond and the turtle egg sprites have the exact same shape. And honestly, I never would have noticed this on my own. But now that I see it, yeah, it's gonna be hard to unsee. If you have yourself an allay, you also have yourself a mobile light source. Let me explain. Using the dynamic lights feature in something like Optifine or a data pack, it's possible that if you give your allay an item that can be a light source, such as a torch or a lantern, then it'll carry that around and still light up the area around you. And hey, since we didn't get fireflies in 1.19, I think this is the closest we got in the wild update. Droppers got a massive change in 1.19, but barely anyone's talking about it. And now, droppers have much less variability when they shoot out an item, which offers up huge changes for the technical community. Since now, as Ilmango shows, we can use droppers for a simple chunk loader like this, which lets your farms keep producing 24/7, even if you don't stand nearby AFK. With your Riptide Trident, we can go up to 200 blocks into the sky. And the way we do this is that if we wait for a rainstorm and then continuously bounce off a slime block bounce pad, each time that we bounce back down, we'll launch higher than the last, which in turn gets us more momentum, and we can continue to do this until we reach so high in the sky that the rain becomes snow, meaning we're so high up in the atmosphere that it starts to get cold up there. And while that's all fun and games, just make sure that you actually land on the slime block when you're ready to come down. We don't need to go from your highest high down to your lowest low. Even though Minecraft is a sandbox game, there are certain rules we're not supposed to break, like placing blocks above a certain height. I mean, why else would it be called the build limit? But that doesn't explain why this site works like so. See, by using a method the community's found for mixing falling sand entities with invisible shulkers, we can essentially make our own builds both above and below the world limit, which can result in some pretty wild sights for sure. So if you're looking for a project in creative, it's a fun tool to use. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that farming in Minecraft is a lot easier than it is in the real world. I know, that sounds crazy. And we might have the game's wonky physics to thank for that. See, even beyond being able to bone meal crops to maturity in a matter of seconds, there's also some weird magic that happens with the farmland itself. As you'll notice, even though the only thing between this water source block and farmland is air, the crops are hydrated just the same. And I know that there are water droplets in the air, but even this seems hard to believe. Trapdoors, despite being made out of wood, cannot be caught on fire. And you'll see as much, even though this whole setup looks a little bit precarious. So, I still wouldn't recommend getting too close to the lava. Even if the trapdoors can't catch on fire, you certainly could. The Warden Sonic Boom might not deal a lot of damage to us, but it could be devastating against the Ender Dragon. And as this example shows, with enough of the Wardens in the end, we can effectively blast the dragon off course. I mean, the dragon can't even get back to her perch. It's that bad. If you were to put string over lava, then no players can hear it, but they can still fall in. And the reason being is that lava only makes noise when there's air blocks above it. So the string stops that. And since oddly enough the string doesn't burn, it'll stay there long enough for you to convince one of your friends to fall in. And if you are that friend, take this as a lesson to make sure to look out for lava, even if you can't hear it nearby. Minecraft is famous for its random generation based off a string of integer values. And I think we've all come across these so-called seeds when booting up one that we found online, or typing in one of our own. Though on the chances you don't do either, how does the game come up with a seed? Well, the answer is more straightforward than you might think. When left to automatically generate a seed, the game will just use the system's time as that seed. And through this, we're able to access a sliver of the over 18 quintillion possible seeds. And I doubt any of our clocks have enough time to showcase all of those. Horses aren't the most ideal form of travel. I mean, you have to spend the time to painstakingly breed for the right stats, only for your special steed to max out at a speed that's slower than the Elytra. Or it would be, unless you're on Bedrock. Over here, there's a that if you give the parents a potion effect like speed and then breed them together, the offspring will continue to be faster. Do this again for a couple of generations, and we can get some supercharged horses, which is definitely a sight to see. And at this point, they're hard to use for a completely different reason. Much like glass blocks, you can use glass panes to change the color of a beacon beam, and then if you stack them, you can change that color multiple times, which allows us to get this kind of pixel art that you're seeing here. All we have to do is just build a shape out of stained glass panes inside the beacon beams, and we'll have a fully visible and fully functional beacon still to see. And And then, if you want to have a break in the beacon path without blocking it off, wall blocks do the trick, since the beacon isn't visible while it's on the inside, but it still goes through the top since it's transparent. A nice discovery for sure. Here's how to trap the admin. With this user's setup of command blocks, we're able to establish a nether portal, change their game mode to adventure mode, and then permanently trap them inside because they can't access their commands or their inventory. And again, because they're in adventure mode, they won't be able to break any blocks either. So they'll just be stuck there to the end of time, or until some other operator wants to help them get out, whichever one happens first. Minecraft redstone is a beautiful thing, but it's not always the most intuitive. And a key instance of that would be this example's so-called leaf stone. Now, that might sound silly, but it's actually true that leaves are capable of transferring block updates. See, since these leaves have a tag that updates whenever a log is nearby, we can use an observer to detect that signal. And in that way, we can send quick updates just by moving a log with a piston. Which seems crazy, but I know there's pros out there who can think of plenty of practical uses for it. If you've ever visited the creative mode's redstone tab, you're aware that Minecraft has a few buttons to choose from. But once you take a firework rocket and right-click it to place it on the pressure plate, then the entity will temporarily give off a pulse. And as such, we can trigger these plates from afar. And while the practicality is questionable, I'm sure your redstone experts can find a proper use for it. Armor stands seem pretty passive. I mean, it's a bunch of sticks on a slab. How bad could that be? But truth is, they can be a bit more feisty than they seem. And you'll see as much if you give them a piece of Thorn's enchanted armor. With this, the enchantment applies the same just as it would with us, which I'll admit is a pretty funny sight. And while it doesn't do a lot of damage, you'll still want to make sure that you take off your armor like this, instead of just punching it off. Wither skeletons are generally scary to come across, so just imagine if one of these had the range of the overworld cousin. Well, apparently that's a lot more fact than fiction. If you actually give a wither skeleton a bow, not only does it beef up the attack area, but it also gives it fire arrows to shoot. And in retrospect, it's probably for the best that Mojang didn't give them a bow from the beginning. The last thing the Nether Fortress needs is another flame shooter. Campfires can be a useful decoration to have in your world, but by this point, everyone's already familiar with these things. So to step outside of the box, these armor stands are a sneaky solution. See, when placed in lava, these things voice and successfully create a new illusion. And so there's a couple more options out there than just using yet another flint. But if you put those same magma blocks underwater, it also can never escape. Because its movement speed is too slow to escape the current, it'll just spin around in a circle on those bubbles. Which is hilarious to watch, but still don't get too close to it. Otherwise, it could still use the sonic boom attack and make it a lot less funny to watch. Now, despite what people try to get you to believe, this structure in the ancient cities is not a portal. But I can understand the confusion, since in the snapshots, this was actually labeled as a small portal structure in the game's code. Though now, it's been renamed to just small structure in the files. And that's not the only mistake that Mojang had to fix in the ancient cities. See, this new block is called reinforced deep slate, and in certain snapshots, it was